Hey, my friends, thank you for joining us today. I'm Dr. Tony Soldano, and this is What Was That About? Well, I am excited today. We have a very special guest. Susan Joseph is with us, and Susan is an occupational therapist. And welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Pastor.
I'm so excited that you are here today. I've been wanting to do a program on mental health and children. Now, not only do you see children, let me just give a little bit of background. So you've been doing this for 24 years.
Yeah.
You've just recently opened a clinic in Vaughan.
That's right.
You work at Etobicoke General, and your patients have been anywhere from preemies all the way to 105 years old.
That's right.
What a size that is of patients, right? And so, wow, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, Susan, let's dive right into this, because I really believe we have a serious situation in our world, and particularly in our society. I see a lot of it. I'm sure that you do, much more than I, when it comes to children in particular and mental health. Now, first of all, Susan, let me ask you the question: is this just hype? Is this just me being dramatic, or do we have an issue in our society when it comes to mental health issues and young people?
So, first of all, thank you, Pastor, for this opportunity. And no, it's not a hype. We've seen an enormous blowout of mental health, and especially with kids. And when I say kids, so I'm typically talking about kids from, 5 years to 17 or 18. And I've seen kids as young as 6 years old in what we call PICU, which is pediatric ICU in the mental health unit at our local hospital. So for a 6-year-old to have mental health, and I'm not full-blown, which means aggressive behaviors needed to be restrained by police, and you have the whole unit, which is typically 3 psychiatrists and nurses, and all of the staff hand and foot on this little kid because they cannot manage. So I don't know if that helps you and just gives you an example of one of the situations of how blown up the whole situation is.
So we're not exaggerating. This is a problem. Of course, we don't hear a lot about this in the media unless you have some kind of, extraordinary case.
Yeah.
But the reality is that we have a lot of cases. The cases are growing. They're not diminishing.
Nope.
The system, and I don't mean any offense, but really the system doesn't seem to have any answers.
Nope.
But we're going to unpack this a little bit at a time. We're probably going to do a part 1, part 2, because there's a lot here to dig into. But let's ask the obvious question: why? First of all, that's very disturbing that a 6-year-old or as young as 6 years old are being restrained, having that sort of mental health issue. And some people I'm sure would be asking, is this mental? Is this demonic? I'm not quite sure that we will dive into that in these programs. But let's ask the obvious question: why are we seeing an increase in these children?
So I don't have a definitive answer, because if I did, then we would have a solution. So I would definitely, I definitely know the fact is we have relationships that are broken down. We have trauma, and I don't mean trauma that we talk about physical trauma. There's so much of mental trauma and psychological trauma between families, and it goes back to relationships, attachment. We have an increase of access to substances.
Wow.
We have we have peer pressure, we have low self-esteem, we have self-confidence that is non-existent in our kids. We honestly don't have kids who are kids anymore. So they've been pushed into an adult world too quickly, and they don't have relationships that they can fall on who validate them for who they are. So I don't know. I just think it's too many things that are.
Wow. So you're almost describing the perfect storm there. You said a lot of things.
Yeah.
You said the breakdown of the family, obviously the breakdown of moral values within our society. access. You said access to substance, obviously access to social media.
Yes.
What you mentioned there, and it's interesting. The whole parameter of the Bible is very community focused, very family, very church focused. So we've even seen a withdrawal
Yes.
of families and children from church and from faith, and then that gets filled with something.
Yes.
The whole course, the whole not only social media but TV and all the messages and the ideologies and
Yes.
agendas that. And I've always been very clear that there are a lot of ideologies that could care less about children, although that's what they espouse.
Yes.
But in reality, it's just to gain momentum and numbers. But we'll unpack this as well. But let's talk a little bit about the family. Let's talk about the breakdown, because now this support system that mom, dad that they could go to, first of all, that's been thrown into
Yes,
complete
sir.
confusion. I think in a lot of cases, the parents are under mental distress. And so now they're having to help their children. They probably can't even help themselves. Let's talk a little bit about the decay in family, some of the things, Susan, that you see, whether it's at the hospital, the clinic. And by the way, you're in the emerge area as well. So you've had vast knowledge over 24 years in various capacities. When it comes to that family relational side of things, what are you seeing there? What's contributing?
So I mean, I'm going to say it, like you said, about the parents, so when you don't have a support system, so whether it be a breakdown in marriages, so you see divorces. I'm not saying divorce is bad. I'm just saying it's the impact of how on kids. Then you have let's talk about COVID. Just with all of COVID, and we had all of our parents who didn't have jobs, who lost jobs. So the financial stresses of maintaining a household, and then you have to educate your kids online on virtual platforms. So that whole aspect as well was very traumatic for our kids, and we don't realize that. I mean, I know there's research happening now about COVID, but let's talk about the family. So so when you have parents who are who are not supportive to each other, they don't see eye to eye, then the kids kind of just fall in between the cracks. Then you have, I'm just going to say, you have, as adults, they're trying to find an outlet. So then it might be affairs, it might be the parents having their own substance abuse happening and, addictions to alcoholism. And all of this basically breaks down the family unit.
Right.
And then... So a lot of the times we see kids who are now being taken care of by their grandparents and an older sibling who's taking over the role of a parent.
Wow.
So there's just the family dynamic is changing.
Right. Because you're right, because parents, they're either both working or, as you said, they're having their own issues. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, and maybe enough research hasn't been done, but the whole area of COVID, what is your, I have my strong opinions on the whole learning from home and isolation, whether, it was more dangerous for children to be in schools versus the virus. And the idea there was because children weren't getting sick at the time. The idea is, they're the carriers of the virus and they're going to come home and kill their grandparents, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. What were your thoughts on that? Do you believe that was the right thing to do, that children should have been taken out of schools, left at home, or are now we seeing the fruit, the bad fruit of that, or was it the right thing to do? I'm just as an occupational therapist, your thought.
So as an occupational therapist, I think there's no right and wrong. So it's probably a hybrid of both. It's probably what would have worked best. As a mom, myself and having two teens who went through this, and my son who is differently abled.
Right.
For him, he just didn't like the online system. I mean, he obviously thrived in. I mean, he thrived because he had to, but it wasn't his choice. As soon as he wanted to get back to in-person schooling as soon as possible. My daughter, on the other hand, didn't mind the online.
Okay.
But I've seen a lot of the kids who I've seen in the mental health unit. So I worked 6 months with the mental health unit at our hospital. A lot of the kids have developed social anxiety.
Wow.
So one of the biggest diagnoses we get now is social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, just homework and the testing and just being I think our kids forgot what it means to socialize. And so when you have kids who've lost 2 years of their lives. Academics obviously had it went down the drain a little
Right.
bit, but then this basic social skills.
Wow. You know, it's funny, Susan, I have a grandson who's just over 2 years old, and obviously I speak to other grandparents and parents. And, you know what, they make this comment, they're not, their children, their grandchildren, et cetera, they're not good around people. But then they say, well, he's a COVID baby, she's a COVID baby, saying they've never been around people other than their family.
Yes. Yeah.
And so they don't know how to socialize. They don't even recognize, wow, there are other humans out there, and I don't, I'm fearful of them, or I'm not sure about them. So even within toddlers,
Yes.
we see this behavior because they've isolated. But what you're saying is that you're seeing these things even with older children,
Yes.
and now that you're putting them back, they just don't know how to adjust, and that's stressful. I mean, school, I had a hard time in school, to be honest with you, but what you're saying is now this idea of them coming back together is causing them a lot of anxiety. And so how does that manifest sometimes? What are the symptoms that you see when obviously that 6-year-old is an aggressive
That's it.
situation. They're probably not all like that, but overall, what are some of the issues that you see?
So most often what we see is just a withdrawal. So let's be honest, we're talking about teens here. So we've all been teens. Teens have their own style of how they do life anyway.
Right.
And then you add on, if you have some like a hidden mental illness, such as generalized anxiety disorder or social anxiety, very often it's that kid who wants to be in their room, doesn't want to socialize with their own parents and siblings. You'll have sleep disturbances. So you have kids who are basically staying up for the wee hours of the morning. Addictions to social media.
Right.
And we're all on our devices. So, so that the screen time, which is, so you see, just honestly, what I've seen the most parents telling me is that they see kids who don't enjoy what they typically would enjoy in the past. So say, for example, someone liked to read books, they don't do that anymore. Someone who liked to play an instrument, they don't do that anymore. They liked to go out and eat at a restaurant, now they don't want to do that. So just those everyday tasks that they typically would enjoy, they withdraw from that. And then you have other things that happen, like, just increased frustration, anger's increased. And these are all when you have... Yeah. Sorry.
So Susan, you just reminded me. I had gone to a chiropractic clinic. It's in somebody's home, licensed business, and sometimes their children are there. And I was fascinated. I want you to comment on this. I was fascinated. So I was in like kind of the waiting area, and the chiropractor's daughter was watching YouTube of other children playing games. So they weren't playing.
Yeah.
They were watching and listening to other children commenting on the game that they were playing. And the child, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 years old, was glued to the screen. And I was, first of all, it took me a moment to figure out what's actually happening on this video. And I asked the chiropractor, I said, what is happening here? And like, Susan, isn't that, in my day, you played with other kids, you played on the street, road hockey, tag, whatever it was. And now, and sometimes we're fearful to let our children on the streets. But what do you think of that particular comment that I just made, that what I observed, that the child was watching other children play the game and comment? So
as an OT, what I would see there is the child who's looking for connection. So maybe that child doesn't have the opportunity to be around kids that age group learning those skills, like you go out and play out outside. They don't probably have a social group that they can engage with, and sometimes that's why you're looking at YouTube to see how that game. It's not to see how the game is played. They literally will watch, and I've seen that happen. They watch those videos and they almost script the conversation that's happening. So. And sometimes some kids do watch that just because they're trying to cheat the game. They're trying to get how to play the game better.
Right. But in a sense, they're connected, but they're not connected.
They're not connected. Yeah.
So they're apart, but they're really not apart.
They're looking for that connection. Wow. They're looking for the in-person connection. Let's be honest. But they're getting it through the virtual.
Wow. So one of the things that we're hearing today, Susan, is that obviously children are looking to connect. They don't know how. And when they're not healthy
Yes.
socially, and now they don't even know how to be healthy socially, then we begin to see the manifestation
That's right.
of these issues within these children, because children are carrying an incredible amount of pressure
And stress.
and stress
Which,
that in my day, and maybe in your day, and I want to get to this in the second program, was oblivious to us. Like, these weren't the problems that we faced. And I don't think, I could be wrong. Maybe people say, well, you don't give children enough credit. I'm not sure that children are ready to handle all that's being asked of them. But I look forward. We're going to talk. We're going to have another program, right? Part 2. But Susan, thank you for joining us today. This has just been fascinating.
thank you, Pastor. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait for part 2.
Yeah. Well, God bless you. I'm Dr. Tony Soldano. Thank you for joining us today on What Was That About?